The Steel type, regarded as the best type ever, due to multiple factors, such as its immaculate defensive properties, its overwhelming stats, the increased production of Steel Pokemons, the capability to pair up and seemingly carry any type, a wide range of moves and megas, alongside a dominant competitive standpoint. But how far beyond is Steel compared to others? Let's take a closer look at Steel, the type reinforced by the numbers. I'll start by looking at the most prominent feature of the Steel typing, that being its overwhelming defensive properties. But instead of just looking at one side, we might as well look at the entirety of the Steel type itself. The Steel type is currently super effective against 3 types, gets resisted by 4, has 3 weaknesses, and a total of 10 resistances, which leads all types for most number of resistances by a singular type by a great margin, beating Fire, who had 6, and Poison, who had 5. And if this wasn't enough, the Steel type also had an immunity to Poison type attack, meaning the Steel type had the same number of immunities plus resistances as the next 2 best types combined. And the craziest part about this is that this is with the changes involving the Fairy type introduction in Generation 6. Prior to Fairy existence, Steel used to resist both Dark and Ghost, allowing it to have a total of 12 resistances or immunities, which was 70% of all types at the time. And since Fairy didn't exist, Fire and Poison combined to a total of 9 resistances or immunities, meaning the Steel type could do way more defensively than the next 2 best defensive types put together, almost enough to be as good as the next 3 best types put together. I'm not sure what Game Freak was thinking when they decided to release this type. There is absolutely no way that they were in the lab forging a new type and thought, this isn't good enough, let's make it unaffected by Sandstorm as well. On second thought, they probably did. Now of course, giving Steel a large amount of defensive properties wasn't enough. They were also given high defensive stats matched up with the typing to make sure that battling Pokemons with this typing would be a hassle to beat. Looking at all types, just know this stat is accounting for just regular and regional form Pokemons. Steel had the largest average defense of all types at 105, beating Rock type by just 1 point, which had an average defense stat of 104. Now here is a graph of all 73 Steel type Pokemon compared to each other by their defense stat, to hopefully better represent just how great they are when it comes to defense. Now, by just looking at the graph, you might think that Steel has alright defense, with a few outliers that go above and beyond the normal amount, until you realize that the average defense stat amongst all 1080 regular and regional form Pokemon is 73. At this range, we see 58 Pokemon above it and 15 below it, which is about 80% of all Pokemon affiliated with the Steel type having a higher defense stat than the average Pokemon. But let's look even further. Standard deviation is a statistic that measures how close a data point is compared to the average. The average defense of all Pokemon is 73. In a normal distribution, 68% of all data points are supposed to be within 1 standard deviation of the average. The value of 1 standard deviation for defense in Pokemon is 29, which allows this mark to range between 44 and 102. Despite the selective range having approximately 2/3 of all Pokemons within it, the Steel type sees something different. 38 out of 73 Steel types are within 1 standard deviation of the average defense. 34 Steel types are above it, and 1 is below it. This means that out of 153 Pokemons that are below 1 standard deviation from the average, the Steel type is the only type to not have multiple Pokemons within that range, inherently proving that the Steel type is favored to receive a strong defense stat, paired up with its already monstrous defense properties. And in case you needed more visual representation, this is how the distribution of all 1080 Pokemon look like when comparing them all together by their defense stat. You can easily see that the mark that includes a range of 44 to 102 are the largest. Furthermore, 16% of all Pokemon are both below this range and above this range, yet the average Steel type defense score puts it in the upper echelon, all while less than 2% of Steel types are in the bottom parts, solidifying itself as a truly exceptional type. Now let's look at the timeline of the Steel type and its growth. Since I know you guys like to see these charts, the Kanto region only released 2 Steel type Pokemon, being Magnemite and Magneton. Since none of these 2 are final stage Pokemon, it causes Kanto to have the lowest average base stat of Steel type in a singular region, with a score of 395, being the only region below 425. But I'm not going to dogpile too much on this stat, since Magnemite and Magneton receiving a Steel typing were an afterthought, and weren't initially planned to have the Steel typing, since it didn't exist until the next generation, although it did have the second largest special attack average by a type in the Kanto region. And its average rank placement compared to other types for the statistical categories in this region was 10.7, which isn't even the worst that Steel has ever had, but more on that soon. Now then, onto the Johto region. This was the region that introduced the Steel type, and with it came 4 Steel type Pokemon, who overall were very strong at the time, as the Steel type had the second highest base stat average in the Johto region at 485, only behind Dragon, which had a base stat of 540, which was achieved by having Kingdra be the only Dragon type from that generation. It also ranked in first for both highest average attack and average defense for a type in this region. Next up is the Hoenn region. This is when the quantity of steel type Pokemon really started to step up. Hoenn released a total of 9 steel types, and it was the first region to introduce one that reached a base stat total of 600 or higher, in which they did it twice, both with the exact same typing. And battling these two Pokemons back in the day was much harder than it is today, since back then, Steel resisted both Ghost and Dark, allowing its number of weaknesses to decrease by 2. And once again, the Steel type on average had the largest defense stat of all types for this region. Next is Sinnoh, one of 2 regions that introduced Steel types with an average base stat of 500 or higher, releasing a lot of very powerful Steel types such as Empoleon, Lucario, Magnezone, Probopass, Dialga, and Heatran. All of these Pokemon surpassing 500 base stat, while given an absurd defensive typing. And in this region, Steel ranked first on both defense and special defense, compared to the average of all types in Sinnoh. The next 2 regions of Unova and Kalos, we finally see a slight decrease in overall strength of Steel types. Unova released the most Steel types in a singular region at 12, while Kalos only released 4 Steel types, and had the lowest average base stat for Steel type Pokemon since its introduction in Johto, with the average Kalos Steel type Pokemon having a base stat of 436. Yet still, in both Unova and Kalos, Steel still managed to have the largest average defense stat amongst all types in their respective regions. Bonus fact, Kalos was the region where Steel type had the lowest average ranking in all statistical category. Next up is the Alola region, the strongest instance of Steel type Pokemon, introducing 8 Steel types who on average had a base stat of 540, which is the highest average Steel type has ever received, due to them releasing a bunch of insane Steel types, such as Solgaleo, Celesteela, Kartana, Magearna, Stakataka, and Melmetal, allowing Steel to rank first in attack and defense again out of all types in this region. And of course, Alola was the region where Steel type had the highest average ranking in all statistical categories. Following along, the Galar region was also pretty weak for the Steel type as a whole, where it only released a total of 5 Pokemon, with the most important one being Corviknight. Crown form Zacian isn't included in this since I'm only looking at base form Pokemon, and this is why Necrozma Duskman wasn't mentioned for Alola, or Origin form Dialga for Sinnoh. And the most important thing about Steel types from the Galar region is that I finally broke the Steel type streak of having the highest average defense, placing in 3rd behind both Ground and Rock. Finally we get to Paldea, where they released a pretty decent chunk of Steel type Pokemon, with a total of 11, most of who were pretty powerful, such as Kingambit, Tinkaton, Arcaludon, Goldengo, and Paradox Pokemons. And yes, it reclaimed its title of having the most defense of a type in the Paldea region, allowing the Steel type to come out on top as a type with the highest average defense stat 7 out of 9 times. This allows the Steel type to have an average base stat total of 480, but with the addition of regional form, the average is lowered to 472. Still very good nonetheless, as this would also allow Steel to have the 2nd largest average base stat total of all types, only behind the legendary Hoarding Dragon type. When looking at just final stage evolution, it ranks as the 3rd highest, so still one of the best types in terms of raw stats. This also allows Steel type to lead on having the largest base stat increase by a type from Kanto to the present day. But of course, as mentioned earlier, Steel came out in Johto, so when comparing Steel average from Johto releases to the growth now, it pretty much lines up with the average amongst all Pokemons. But I'll let you guys decide on whether you think that overall strength of Steel has increased over time, or do they seem as strong as they were when they initially came out. Now let's look at how Steel type Pokemon has become more easily available to obtain. In this chart, you can see that despite the total number of Pokemon decreasing per generation, the number of Steel types have been increasing, as we see about 4.5 less Pokemons per generation, but 0.5 more Steel types in each generation. This of course allows the Steel type concentration to skyrocket over the years, as when they were first released in the Johto region, Steel took up about 2.4% of all Pokemon slots, but when you look at today, 6.3% of all 1025 Pokemon are affiliated with the Steel typing. When accounting for regional forms as well, then it becomes 6.7% of all Pokemon having a connection to the Steel type. So why has it been increasing? One possibility that comes to mind is that Game Freak are trying to indirectly improve the quality of other types by pairing them up with the Steel typing. So let's check out how fairly distributed the Steel type is when selecting the type it's paired up with. I will once again be choosing the types from Wolfie's video about 153 type combinations, as I think more people will be content with me using his rating instead of my own, since he's more certified. I don't make the rules, I'm just keeping it real. In his video, the 3 worst type combinations that Steel could be paired up with is Rock, Normal, and Ice. Only 5 times out of 41 has a final stage Steel type Pokemon received one of these typings, with none of these 5 being the normal Steel combination. which in totality is a very low rate, especially when in comparison to the number of times the top 3 best steel type combination has been used, which were Steel Fairy, Bug, and Ground, which had a total of 14 final stage Pokemon, at least 4 of each type, and these 3 combinations take up over 1/3 of all final stage dual steel type combinations. Not to forget to mention that all 3 of these highly valuable steel combinations all have a Mega Evolution with their corresponding type, but as for the 3 weakest, not a single one of them are associated with a Mega Evolution. Even Aggron, who has a type of Rock and Steel, but somehow becomes the only Pokemon to lose a typing when it Mega Evolves. So despite Steel already being considered the best type individually, Game Freak decided that instead of using it to aid awful types, that the Steel type is much more suited with types that are already capable of battling on their lonesome. Now with all that being said, let's look at a competitive aspect of Pokemon and see how these factors lead the Steel type to dominate in pretty much any format. Just know, the data collected for this part is from Pikalytic, and these stats were observed on December 30th, 2024, so they could be changed from when you are viewing this video. Let's start by looking at the Uber tier, the highest tier that contains the strongest Pokemon, basically where all the box legendaries are at. In this tier, the 6 most used Pokemons are Koraidon, Zacian Crown Form, Eternatus, Necrozma Duskmane, Ho-Oh, and Kyogre. All 6 of these Pokemon have a usage rate above 25%. Miraidon isn't here because it got banned from this tier a few months back because it's insanely broken. Koraidon might be next to get banned in the near future since it's ran on more teams than the next 2 best options combined. But who knows? Anyways, of these top 6 most used Uber Pokemon, the only type that was reused was Dragon and Steel, with Crown Form Zacian and Necrozma Duskmane, both in the top 4 for Ubers. Another duplicated type isn't found until we reach the 8th spot for most used Pokemon in Ubers for December 2024, with Ribombee, which has a typing of Fairy, matched with Zacian, although its high usage is mainly due to its high speed stat and the move Sticky Web. I go more into detail about this in my bug type video, so go check that out if you haven't already. Now let's look at the OU tier. Once again, even in this tier, the first type to be seen duplicated in terms of usage rate is Steel, with King Gambit and Gholdengo both appearing in the top 3 for most used OU Pokemons in December 2024. If we look at Regulation Set H format, we see the same thing. Gholdengo, a Steel type Pokemon, has the highest usage rate, and the first type to be repeated is the Steel type, only needing 4 spots with Archaludon. Dragon is also repeated due to Dragonite and Archaludon both possessing the Dragon typing, but this probably has more to do so with the fact that they have a large base stat to work with and access to a large move pool rather than their typing, allowing it to have a ton of variety, as seen with Dragonite not even having a stab flying attack move in its set, and more focused on having supporting moves and extreme speed for revenge killing. Now let's look at the monotype format, a format where a team of Pokemon must all share a common type. The top 4 most used Pokemon in this format are all Dragon type, yet despite this heavy lead in usage against all other types, the first type to have a full team of 6 was of course the Steel type, only taking 10 positions for that typing to reach a complete team composition. This was obviously going to be the case since more than half of the types that exist would have to fight an uphill battle against this type, as one of their stab attack will deal decreased damage due to the properties of the Steel type. The only format where Steel doesn't really thrive in is OU doubles, where only 2 out of the top 20 most used Pokemons in this format were associated with the Steel typing, which is about the average amount of appearances each type has in this format. This is vastly different from what is normally seen from the Steel type, as it usually leads in usages. And the reason for this is because it might just be too tough for any individual type to have defensive coverage against 2 separate Pokemons at the same time, thus making the value of its defensive properties not as impactful in this format. Furthermore, the Steel type Pokemon only helps itself with its typing, and not your allied Pokemon, so there isn't anything stopping your opponents from targeting your non-Steel type Pokemons, especially since no Steel type Pokemon exist that are able to learn the move Rage Powder or Follow Me, unless you Terra Steel a Pokemon with one of these moves, but that's a whole different scenario. But what about the moves these Pokemon possesses? The Steel type is commonly known for 3 moves: Flash Cannon, which is used mainly by Steel type that specializes in special attack, Iron Head, which is for Steel type that specializes in physical attack, and finally Heavy Slam, which deals damage based on weight difference between your Pokemon and the opposing Pokemon. This move is very good for Steel, as not only are they benefited with the stab bonus, the Steel type also has some of the heaviest Pokemons in the game, leading all types in most amount of Pokemon with a weight of 1000 pounds or higher, really allowing Steel type to put this move into good use. But as a common theme in this video, you probably realized by now, Game Freak will continue glazing the Steel type despite it already having great defensive properties, favorable dual typing, and astounding stats. Simply giving Steel type just regular moves wasn't going to cut it. So what did they do about it? Give almost every powerful Steel type Pokemon their own unique attack. Let's start with Bullet Punch. the first move that I will be mentioning for this section. This move is the only offensive steel attack that gives priority. Only 3 final stage steel type Pokemon can learn this move, alongside a select few fighting types. Anyway, all 3 of these steel type Pokemon has an attack stat of at least 110. So despite Bullet Punch being only 40 base power, these Pokemon could still be able to deal some damage. To make it worse, all 3 of them can Mega Evolve, allowing a further increase in their attack stat and increasing damage output, also alongside a speed increase. So they might not even need to rely on the priority and just simply outspeed with a more powerful attack. Coincidentally, all 3 of these Megas have different abilities, yet all 3 of these abilities allow for a larger damage increase of Bullet Punch as well, making such a simple attack deadly. But Game Freak isn't done giving special treatment to Metagross and Lucario yet, as alongside Jirachi, they could learn to move Meteor Mash as well, a move with 90 base power that does have a chance to boost your attack stat. At this point, if one of these Pokemon get an attack boost off, while already outspeeding since they all reach a triple digit speed stat, you might as well save your time and quit the match. Did I mention that all 3 of these Pokemon have an ability that boosts the effectiveness of Meteor Mash? Also, Jirachi, since it's a mythical Pokemon, has a unique move called Doom Desire, which is basically identical to Future Sight, but 15% stronger with no drawbacks. Other notable Steel-type moves that are exclusive to very few amount of Pokemon are Shift Gear, that came with the Klinklang evolution line, Metal Burst, that return damage received at a higher proportion. This move pairs up really well with the ability Sturdy, as it allows for a guaranteed hit. Aegislash King Shield, which is a stronger variant of just regular Protect. Iron Crown with Tachyon Cutter, allowing for guaranteed double hit. Iron Tread with Steel Roller. Reverum with Spin Out. Metal with Double Iron Bash. Crown Form Zacian and Zamazenta with their Behemoth attack, Golden Go with Make It Rain, Tinkaton with Gigaton Hammer, and finally Solgaleo with Sunsteel Strike, which can be turned into a Z move called Searing Sunray Smash. They just be giving everyone a Steel type signature attack, even Dhelmise with Anchor Shot, and it isn't even a Steel type. Alright, enough of all that. There's still one last area to cover for this video, and that's Steel type Mega Evolution and how changes of Generation 6 with Megas and the Fairy type caused a lot of Steel type Pokemons to get banned from certain competitive formats. The Steel type was given a very comfortable 6 Megas, which is more than the average type, with Mega Scizor, who obtained more lethal bullet punches, Mega Steelix and Aggron, both gaining insane amount of defenses to set a record for highest defense of all Pokemon. Mega Mawile completely turning the Pokemon around with an absurd ability and better typing. Mega Lucario receiving heightened offensive stat and offensive ability. And finally Mega Metagross. It was already a devastatingly powerful pseudo-legendary. Not much more is needed to be said. And with these new heightened stats, Steel type Pokemon were reigning terror around multiple Pokemon metagames during Generation 6. Since of course, if you were to mix the strongest shield, that being the Steel defensive type properties, and giving it the strongest sword, which in these cases are immense offensive stats, there's not really much one can do to stop it. So the first Pokemon I will look at is coincidentally the Pokemon that can swap between sword and shield in Aegislash. Stat wise, Aegislash doesn't seem too crazy or broken, but as mentioned earlier, it has a signature move known as King Shield, which is basically an enhanced version of Protect, where outside of the original effect one receives from Protect, King Shield also reduces enemies' attack stages by 2 if they were to use a physical attack. And let's be honest, most Pokemon who are using a physical attack are paired up with physical movesets, meaning if you were caught in this trap, that Pokemon would become unusable and must require a switch out. Now this King Shield move is only a problem due to its ability, as the way Aegislash works is that it starts in shield form until it attacks, so it keeps 150 defensive stats and swaps to 150 offensive stats on the owner's choosing. And while in blade form, all you have to do to avoid getting hit is use King Shield and avoid taking any heavy blows. The easiest way to get through this predicament was somehow have a slower Pokemon that allows itself to attack Aegislash before it gets the chance to turn back into its shield form. The problem there is that most Pokemon with a lower speed stat than Aegislash are more designed to be a tank rather than a sweeper, so they couldn't effectively defeat Aegislash in a single turn of vulnerability anyways. And some players were using Iron Ball Zero Speed IV Aegislash, so that it had the lowest speed possible to even counter such a strategy, all whilst boosting the damage of a stab Gyro Ball. Sure, there were other ways to counter Aegislash with using Will-O-Wisp or Taunt, but overall, this tactic of Aegislash frustrated many players, and thus leading it to get banned from the OU to Uber tier, until the Sword and Shield game, where it met a nerf in its base stat and passed down due to power creep. Let's look at other bans. Mega Lucario. Bro was just broken, nothing else to say. It could, if you so desired, be built as both physical or special sweeper, by having access to both Swords Dance and Nasty Plot, while somehow having both a physical and special priority move. This added with insane offensive stat, boosted by adaptability, quickly got it banned from being used in the OU format. Mega Mawile. This Pokemon went from being in the PU tier, which is the second lowest tier, during the Black and White games, all the way to Ubers in the next generation of X and Y. How is this possible? Type change and a Mega. Mawile went from Mono Steel in Gen 5 to what is considered the best type in the game of Steel and Fairy in Generation 6. And as for its Mega, despite not seeming too dangerous just looking at its less than 500 base stat total, its ability Huge Power allows its attack stat to actually be doubled, allowing it to have the largest attack stat of any Pokemon that possess this ability, all while simultaneously allowing it to have the best typing amongst these Pokemon as well. Basically, Mawile had an attack stat over 200, while bypassing its own lack of speed since it has access to the move Sucker Punch, causing it easily to get banned from the OU tier. Mega Steelix. This Pokemon was initially in the NU tier, and compared to other Megas, really not that crazy. It's just that this tier is deadass compromised of Pokemon who are never used. That's literally what NU and NU tier means. And with it having such great offensive and defensive typing, paired with the highest defense stat to exist, it was just too difficult for Pokemon in this tier to beat it. So it got banned from both NU and the tier above that, RU. Mega Metagross, the final Mega on this list. Now obviously, look at its typing. And look at its stats. They speak for themselves. It's pretty similar to Mega Lucario, who I mentioned earlier, which was easily banned in OU. The thing is, Mega Metagross didn't get banned from OU like Mega Lucario, and barely was able to avoid the ban hammer, with a Pokemon needing 60% pro ban rate to actually be banned. Mega Metagross narrowly escapes with only 57% pro ban vote. The two factors that saved Metagross from being banned were A, an inferior ability compared to that of Mega Lucario, and B, a moderately low speed stat for Metagross prior to its Mega Evolution, which does leave a chance for opponents to deal heavy damage or one-hit KO Metagross prior to it even Mega Evolving. But this section is talking about bans. Where is Mega Metagross's ban? Well, that happened in the next generation of Sun and Moon, where they changed how speed calculations work for Megas, where now the speed stat for a Mega is counted the turn they plan to Mega instead of the turn after. This change obviously tipped the scales of Mega Metagross to get banned from OU. The Steel types were causing major problems during Gen 6 and 7, but it didn't stop there, as one Steel type even got banned from Ubers itself. In Generation 8, Game Freak thought it was a good idea to create
Ground Form Zacian.
Best typing, unmatched speed, surreal attack stat, and an ability that gives it an attack boost every single time it steps on the field. So you're basically looking at a Pokemon with a base attack stat of 235. Realistically, this is just a roided up Mega Mawile, more bulk, stronger, and faster. I'm not sure what's going on in Pokemon HQ, but for whatever reason, since they introduced Mega Rayquaza in Generation 6, they thought it would be a funny idea to always introduce at least one busted Pokemon. Anyways, getting too sidetracked. Back to Crown Form Zacian. How does one counter it efficiently? Perhaps the Dynamax mechanic they introduced in the same generation that allows your Pokemon health to double and use stronger attacks will help. This Pokemon, known as Crown Form Zacian, has a signature move called Behemoth Blade that has one simple effect. If the opponent Pokemon is Dynamaxed, the damage is doubled. You couldn't even use that generation's gimmick to stop Zacian from dog walking your team. So now your team is getting pummeled. Your one Dynamax usage in a game probably got depleted in a single instance, and now you have Cynophobia. All this put together caused Zacian to get banned from Uber and only allowed to be used in the most broken format known as Anything Goes, until the following generation, where they decided, yeah, this is too much, let's reduce its attack stat slightly and only allow its ability to occur once, finally allowing other Pokemon a chance to have breathing space. But what do you guys think? Do you think this absolute Goliath of a type that has every single factor of Pokemon on its side will ever fall from its throne of being considered the best, or will it always stay on top and consistently remain as the type, reinforced by the numbers?